One winter afternoon in 1995, police received a frantic phone call from a man in a state of panic. When they arrived at the scene, they discovered 4 lifeless bodies lying on the floor. What exactly happened before the police got there? Specifically, in the early evening of January 19, 1995, the Hohhot Public Security Bureau received a report that shocked the entire city. Tianxiang Bao, vice president of the Academy of Forestry Sciences, and 4 members of his family had been brutally murdered, each of them shot to death. According to investigators, the 4 victims were Vice President Tianxiang Bao, 56 years old, his wife Rena Wu, 49, a retired employee of a department store, their second son Yinhu Bao, 21, a former soldier awaiting job placement, and their daughter Gina Bao, 17, a student at Hohhot No. 35 Middle School. All 4 were shot and killed in their home, leaving only one survivor, Yintao Bao, the eldest son. Just before police arrived at the scene, around 2 p.m. that day, Yintao returned home after being out. As soon as he opened the door, he was paralyzed by the horrifying sight. His father, mother, younger brother, and sister were lying in pools of blood, no longer breathing. Panicked and in shock, he ran out of the house screaming, his cries echoing through the hallway and quickly drawing the attention of nearby neighbors. Several of them rushed to the scene, only to witness the grisly aftermath of a family massacre. In an instant, what was once a happy household of 5 had been reduced to just one surviving son, Yin Tao. Following calls from residents, the city's criminal investigation team and forensic examiners from the autonomous region immediately arrived at the scene. On the 2nd floor, east wing of the Academy of Forestry Sciences residential building, they found that the entrance to the Bao family's apartment was completely intact. The door had both a metal security gate and a wooden inner door. Neither showed signs of forced entry. Upon entering, investigators found bloodstains on the floor and several household items, indicating that a deadly shooting had taken place. The 4 bodies were scattered throughout the house, each shot in the head. None of the victims showed signs of struggle or attempted escape. Forensic analysis concluded that they had likely died on the night of January 17th, possibly while completely unaware and off guard. From the living room, police quickly identified the murder weapon, a Type 56 carbine rifle lying on the dining table. 1 unfired cartridge remained inside the rifle, while 3 spent casings were found scattered across the floor. In total, there were 4 shots fired, 1 for each victim, indicating a swift and deliberate execution. Strikingly, after the final shot, the killer didn't even bother to remove the remaining round. Instead, they simply tossed the rifle back onto the table. The living room, dining area, hallway, and floors had all been thoroughly wiped down, leaving no visible footprints. All fingerprints found at the scene belonged exclusively to members of the Bao family. There was no trace of any outsider. This detail led investigators to assume that the killer had deliberately cleaned the entire floor to eliminate all traces. There were no signs of struggle inside the house, and none of the victims showed any defensive wounds, as if they had all been attacked suddenly, according to a plan that had been carefully premeditated. Not long after, another clue inside the master bedroom drew further attention from the investigative team. Tianxiang's room appeared to have been searched. The closet door was open, clothes were strewn across the floor, and drawers had been pulled out, leaving behind an empty gun holster, a leather wallet, and a camera. It seemed the perpetrator had been looking for something, yet oddly overlooked a locked box containing over $140 in cash that remained untouched in the room. Outside the front door, the family's dog remained innocently tied up. During the attack, it hadn't barked or made any noise, which meant the neighbors didn't notice anything suspicious. Interestingly, the dog had not been harmed either, as if the killer was already familiar with its presence. As the crime scene investigation continued, police found that the perpetrator had left behind very few clues, and most of them were difficult to interpret. However, just as the case was hitting a dead end, the autopsy report from the forensics team revealed a disturbing breakthrough. Gina Bao, the 17-year-old daughter, an 11th grade student known by friends as quiet and reserved, was found to be hiding a horrifying secret. pelvic bone structure, and trauma in her genital region indicated that Gina had been engaged in sexual activity with a man over an extended period. This revelation stunned the entire investigative team. To her teachers and classmates, Gina was a well-behaved and modest girl who had never shown any signs of romantic involvement. Yet the forensic evidence suggested a far more complex and disturbing private life. This finding raised a chilling new question. Was this massacre truly targeting the father because of his high-ranking position, or was Gina herself the intended target? Given the increasingly complex nature of the case and the absence of any signs of forced entry or resistance, police were forced to shift their focus to the social circles of all 4 victims. A large-scale investigation was launched, during which officers interviewed over 400 local residents and 124 relatives and close acquaintances of the Bao family. Despite these efforts, no valuable physical evidence was found at the crime scene. Determining the motive, method, and true nature of the crime became exceedingly difficult. In this context, Yin Tao, the only surviving family member and the key witness, was immediately placed under special protection. Still, the investigation remained stalled. From January 19th to January 28th, the Special Task Force worked 10 consecutive days at the Academy of Forestry Sciences, conducting repeated interrogations in the interview rooms, but made no meaningful progress. Eventually, they had to withdraw temporarily. These developments unfolded just days before the Lunar New Year. The brutal murder of the Bao family not only shocked the entire country, but was also classified as the #1 case in the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region. It was listed as a top priority investigation, directly supervised by the Ministry of Public Security. By May 17th, after a long pause in the investigation, the Special Task Force officially regrouped and returned to the Academy of Forestry Sciences. This time, the investigators made one thing clear: they would not return to headquarters until the case was solved. From that point on, the investigation was elevated to its highest intensity, with a strategy focused on deep and comprehensive probing. Still, the path forward was anything but easy. At that moment, police had no clear leads pointing to a suspect. Faced with this, investigators were forced to shift direction, starting with an inquiry into the internal relationships within the Bao family, beginning with the 17-year-old daughter, Gina. At the same time, another team focused on the father, Tianxiang. As vice president of the Academy of Forestry Sciences, Tianxiang had held a prominent government position for many years, and there was reason to believe he may have been hiding complex personal relationships or unresolved grudges. Meanwhile, Yin Tao also underwent a series of police interrogations. He told officers that his younger sister had always been the most pampered of the children, the one their parents loved and protected the most. At school, she often drew attention from her classmates, and several boys had sent her letters. However, after a brief hesitation, Yin Tao added that as far as he knew, Gina had never been in a romantic relationship. Yin Tao's account was quickly confirmed by Gina's classmates. When officers interviewed more than a dozen female students from her class, all of them agreed that Gina was extremely shy around boys. Just a few words exchanged with male classmates would make her visibly nervous, making the idea of her dating seem highly unlikely. Because none of Gina's friends could confirm any romantic involvement, the situation became even more complicated. Based on the evidence collected at the scene, police were forced to temporarily rule out the theory that the murders were driven by romantic jealousy or a relationship conflict. In parallel, another investigative thread focused on Tianxiang. As police looked into his personal life and social connections, they uncovered that the deputy director had a somewhat tarnished reputation in the community. Some accused him of being greedy, involved in extramarital affairs, and negligent as a father, claims suggesting that his 2 children had suffered as a result. Others alleged he had unfairly distributed housing within the academy, disadvantaging many workers. However, the police viewed these statements largely as everyday grievances, lacking any solid connection to the brutal murders that had taken place. Just as all investigative leads seemed to be drying up, a new and unexpected tip surfaced. Someone reported to the police that Cheng Ouyang, the party secretary of Ulankab City, had allegedly threatened on multiple occasions to kill Tianxiang and his entire family. This claim instantly brought Chung into sharp focus for the task force. According to accounts from several internal sources, Chung had once been Tianxiang's direct subordinate. Meanwhile, Jiping Wang was both a friend and close confidant of Tianxiang. However, a major conflict had reportedly erupted between the three men during a night of heavy drinking, when Jiping allegedly offered his personal secretary to Chung as a mistress. Not long after, news of the incident reached Tianxiang, after Chung's wife discovered the affair and caused an internal uproar. During a major citywide assembly, Tianxiang publicly announced Chung's dismissal, humiliating him in front of his colleagues. His family fell apart, his wife and children left him, and from that moment on, Chung harbored a deep grudge, vowing multiple times to take revenge on Tianxiang. Despite their troubled past, Chung managed to remain active in social circles thanks to the support of Jiping. He opened a nightclub in Hohhot City and quickly found business success. Even more surprising, after Tianxiang was transferred to work in the same city, the two men resumed contact and often met for drinks. Most notably, Chung had been at the Bao family home for lunch with Tianxiang on the very day of the murders. From the dining table, police recovered Chung's fingerprints on a wine glass, confirming that he had indeed been present at lunch. However, investigators suspected this was merely a facade, an attempt to appear friendly and conceal his true intentions. Chung claimed that he had returned to his hotel room afterward to sleep off the alcohol, but no one could corroborate his alibi. To verify his statement, the task force brought in lie detection experts from the Ministry of Public Security. The results raised multiple red flags. Based on those findings, police decided to place Chung under arrest. After several rounds of intense interrogation, he eventually confessed to murdering the 4 members of the Bao family. At first, it seemed like the case had finally been solved. After all, the primary suspect had admitted to the crime. But doubts remained within the investigative team. The crime scene had been cleaned too meticulously, too perfectly. This led many to believe Chung hadn't acted alone. As suspected, the Hohhot Intermediate People's Court did not accept the police's initial conclusion. At the same time, the nation was tightening its crackdown on violent crime, and the fact that such a horrific massacre remained unresolved put immense pressure on law enforcement. Faced with growing scrutiny, the police were forced to reopen the case from scratch. Upon re-examining all the evidence and previously overlooked details, the task force discovered one critical clue that had been missed. This clue centered on the rifle found on the dining table. According to the original forensic report, the weapon had been fired 3 times, with all 3 shell casings found scattered on the floor. However, in the case of the 4th shot, the casing was still lodged in the chamber, suggesting the killer hadn't had time to eject it. Instead, they had hastily placed the rifle back on the table and fled the scene. This detail immediately raised red flags among the investigators. It stood in stark contrast to the otherwise calculated and deliberate actions the killer had taken throughout the crime. They began to suspect that this wasn't simply an oversight caused by panic, but rather the first real slip-up. The task force quickly narrowed their focus back onto the weapon and launched an emergency internal discussion to analyze the implications of this sudden, careless move. At the same time, several other signs gradually came to light. The front door of the victim's home was completely intact, with no signs of forced entry. The family dog, normally quick to bark at any stranger, had remained eerily silent on the night of the murders, almost as if it was already familiar with the killer. But perhaps most chilling of all was the fact that after committing the crime, the perpetrator had meticulously cleaned the entire scene, as if nothing had ever happened. In the middle of a tense meeting, one investigator suddenly raised a question that took everyone by surprise. Could the killer have been Yintao Bao himself? The room went silent. The suspicion stemmed from a number of unusual circumstances. For starters, the windows at the scene showed no damage, suggesting that only someone with a key could have entered, and Yintao was one of them. Furthermore, police discovered a total of 6 shell casings, 4 found on the balcony, 1 jammed in the rifle chamber, and 1 that had somehow ended up on Yintao's person. Strangely, the shell casing found on Yintao perfectly matched the rifle recovered from the scene, yet he was unable to offer any plausible explanation. Moreover, between 3:30 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. on the day of the murders, Yintao was completely out of contact. and no one could confirm his whereabouts during that critical window. Digging deeper into his background, investigators found that his relationship with the rest of the family had long been strained. Since childhood, he had lived apart from the rest of the family and had not been raised under the same roof. Adding to the suspicion, on that very afternoon, his younger brother Yin Hubao had texted to say he wouldn't be home for dinner, yet Yin Tao kept urging him to come back to help prepare the meal. As a result, the moment his brother stepped through the door, he was killed. In Tianxiang's bedroom, forensic analysis revealed that Yin Tao's fingerprints covered nearly every surface, suggesting he had frequented the room often. More notably, the family's gun and ammunition had been hidden in a carefully concealed location, something only someone in the household would know, yet the killer found it easily and managed to assemble the weapon successfully. Even more suspicious, the next morning it was Yin Tao himself who placed the emergency call to police. But instead of simply reporting the discovery, he immediately claimed that the killer had used the family's gun to murder them, despite the fact that police had not yet released this detail to the public. As for his demeanor, some recalled that he appeared so devastated he nearly fainted, but after a single suggestion to let go, he instantly calmed down, as if the entire reaction had been rehearsed. On top of that, multiple elements of the crime scene didn't align with typical robbery-murder cases. Even assuming this had been a burglary gone wrong, the arrangement of the crime scene didn't match the usual patterns. If theft were the motive, violence would typically only occur if the intruder was caught in the act. Yet $140 in cash and a camera were left untouched. The closet had been ransacked, with clothing scattered everywhere, but valuable items like leather jackets were not taken. All of this led investigators to question whether the killer's real intent had been to eliminate everyone in the household, not to steal from them, suggesting a deliberate and calculated motive behind the entire massacre. In addition, during his interviews with the police, Yin Tao was unable to clearly state whether anything had been stolen from the house. This uncertainty made him the only person who could not be definitively ruled out as a suspect. Still, the investigators understood that the existing evidence was circumstantial at best, not yet strong enough to press charges. Given the situation, on June 19, 1996, the task force made the decision to secretly detain him for further questioning. During the initial interrogation, Yin Tao remained firm, repeatedly claiming he was innocent and insisting that he had nothing to do with the brutal murder of his family. His cold gaze and evasive answers left the investigative team at a standstill. With no other options, the police brought in specialists from the Ministry of Public Security and decided to administer a polygraph test. After several intensive interrogation sessions and a thorough analysis of the results, the test indicated that Yin Tao was the one who had fired the shots on the night of the massacre. This breakthrough only strengthened the team's resolve to extract a full confession. Under increasing psychological pressure and a tightening line of questioning, cracks began to form in Yin Tao's defense. 6 days after his arrest, he finally opened up, admitting to the police that his actions had stemmed from years of resentment and despair. He then described in haunting detail the events of that horrific night. Looking back, Yin Tao had not grown up with his parents. He was sent to live with his maternal grandparents from a young age, which caused an emotional distance to form early on. It wasn't until elementary school that he was brought back to live with his family, full of hope for a real home and a sense of belonging. But one of his most painful memories came when he was just 11 years old. One day, he walked in on his father, Tianxiang, in an intimate moment with the family's nanny. He told his mother, hoping she would protect him. Instead, the result was a bitter family argument that ended with the nanny being fired. From then on, Tianxiang grew distant and began to regularly beat and verbally abuse him. What made it worse was his mother's silence. Every time his father beat him, she would simply stand there, watching, saying nothing. Her cold, detached expression didn't waver, no matter how much Yin Tao cried. The empty comfort and long stretches of avoidance hurt more than the physical blows. The deepest scar of all was left by something he could never forget. One night, he heard strange noises coming from his sister Gina's room. Frozen in fear, he peeked through the door and saw his father's face committing an unspeakable act against his own daughter. Yintao stood trembling in the hallway, paralyzed with horror. From that moment on, the hatred inside him became a fire no one could extinguish. The next day, he summoned all his courage to tell his mother. He carried with him one last sliver of hope that this time she might listen and protect her child. But her reaction crushed him. She remained calm, asked no further questions, and simply told him not to let the matter get out. According to her, Gina wasn't their biological daughter but adopted. If the truth came out, she said, Tianxiang's career would be over. Those words left Yintao speechless. He stared at his mother's emotionless face, as if all the pain he had endured had never mattered. From that night on, his image of his father turned into that of a monster, and his mother, though she didn't raise a hand, had chosen to side with the one who committed the crime. As for his sister Gina, she became little more than a shadow, forced to exist in a family soaked in guilt, unable to escape. Yintao said that the rage and humiliation he felt that night exploded all at once. There was no longer any love in this household. All the resentment he had buried from childhood to adulthood had reached its limit, and in that moment, it all fused into one terrifying thought. He wanted to use a gun to end everything. It wasn't just the trauma of the past. It was the quiet favoritism in every meal, every word spoken, that made him feel like he didn't belong in the place they called a family. Yintao confessed that for years his parents had always showered his younger brother Yinhu with attention and affection, while he existed more like an invisible outsider, someone merely allowed to live nearby, not truly seen. That feeling of abandonment went beyond emotion. It was visible in every decision they made. The Bao family was not financially struggling, but in his memory, he had never once received any kind of monetary support from his parents. Over time, that deepened the bitterness in his heart. At one point, he even tried to change how his family saw him. In September 1994, he was entrusted with managing the small convenience store owned by his mother. During that time, he put genuine effort into the business, hoping to turn that small venture into a path to prove his worth. But things quickly spiraled out of control. Without telling anyone, he used the property ownership certificate to take out a $280 loan to pay off some debts, but the investment failed. The losses mounted, and eventually, he had to return home and ask his parents for help. They rejected him without hesitation. Under mounting pressure, extreme thoughts began to take hold. He wanted to kill everyone in the family and claim all of his parents' property for himself, to put an end to the years of being treated like a disposable extra. From that point on, he quietly began planning a bloody massacre. The plan was set into motion on the afternoon of January 18, 1995, at around 3:30 p.m., when Yintao brought 2 glass panels home. In his mind, he had already rehearsed the crime many times. Ultimately, he decided to use the rifle already in the house. He would use the light in his room to lure each family member in, and then eliminate anyone who stood in his way. To avoid being caught, he wore gloves and searched for the gun and ammunition in his father's bedroom, items he had already practiced using in secret. By about 5:20 p.m., Tianxiang returned home from work. He took off his coat, changed into slippers, and as usual, walked through the house to check each room. When he noticed the bathroom light still on, he pushed open the connecting door to Yintao's bedroom. At that very moment, the trap was sprung. Yintao was hiding coldly atop the wardrobe, clutching the rifle in his hands. As soon as his father looked up, he pulled the trigger. Not giving him a single chance to react, Yintao fired a second shot, ending Tianxiang's life on the spot. Less than 20 minutes later, his mother returned home. At approximately 5:40 p.m., she opened the front door and started walking through Yintao's room on her way to the bedroom, as she did every day. But before she could take more than a few steps, Yintao was already waiting behind the door. Without a second of hesitation, he pulled the trigger. She collapsed in a pool of blood before she could say a word. Just a few minutes after that, the sound of the door unlocking echoed again. At 5:50 p.m., his younger sister, Gina Bao, entered the house. She noticed the light in Yintao's bedroom was still on and, puzzled, walked toward the door to turn it off. The moment she opened it, a bullet struck her head, and she fell instantly to the floor. While the massacre unfolded in eerie silence, a text message appeared on Yin Tao's phone. It was from Yinhu, his younger brother, saying he wouldn't be coming home that evening. Upon reading the message, Yin Tao quickly crafted a reply, claiming he was at the shopping mall and couldn't leave, and urging Yinhu to come home early to help their mother prepare dinner. Not long after, Yinhu arrived. At around 6:10 p.m., he walked into the house, as instructed. Since the brothers shared a room, he entered casually, without suspicion. As he turned his back, Yin Tao emerged from Gina's room and fired from behind. One bullet wasn't enough. He fired a second shot to ensure Yinhu was dead. With the entire family now gone, Yin Tao began to clean up. He carried the rifle into the bathroom, rinsed it thoroughly with water, and then grabbed a mop to wipe up the bloodstains. Every movement was deliberate and methodical, as though he were trying to erase every trace of the horror he had just created. Once finished, he backed out of the apartment, locked the door, and left in silence. On his way out, he made sure to stage a cover. He handed the 2 glass panels to a neighbor across the hall, claiming he had forgotten his keys and asking the neighbor to return them later when someone was home. After that, Yin Tao left the scene as if nothing had happened and calmly rode his bicycle to his grandparents' house. To build a solid alibi, the next morning, Yin Tao went to the shopping mall, intentionally reshuffling his activities for January 19th to make it seem as though he had been out all day when the murders occurred. Around 2 p.m., he returned home pretending to be in shock upon discovering the crime scene. He then rushed to the security office at the Academy of Forestry Sciences to report the incident. At that point, he truly believed his plan had succeeded. In his confession, Yin Tao said he was confident the police wouldn't suspect him. After all, he was a blood relative, which made him an unlikely perpetrator. As long as he maintained a calm demeanor, answered questions politely, and didn't show any emotional inconsistencies, he believed he could deceive everyone. However, that confidence was quickly shattered by reality. In the days following the crime, he admitted that he had been living in constant fear, guilt, and regret. During interrogation, despite his seemingly indifferent expression and calm tone, he confessed that if he could go back in time, he would never have chosen this path. To him, everything had already come to an end. Just 1 year later, the final verdict was delivered. On July 1st, 1996, the Hohhot Intermediate People's Court sentenced Yin Tao Bao to death. In court, he admitted to all of his crimes, waived his right to appeal, and expressed a desire for swift and strict punishment under the law. The Bao family case was not just a tragedy, it was a devastating wake-up call about silence, neglect, and the buried psychological wounds that can exist in what should be the safest place of all, the family home. When love and trust within a family are lost, home no longer heals. It becomes the breeding ground for hatred and despair. Perhaps the most terrifying part of this story isn't the gunshots that rang out that night, but the decades before, when no one truly listened to the cries of a child. What are your thoughts on this case? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this video compelling, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.